I was thinking a lot about what company I'd like to tell you guys about. And I'll be honest, really honest with this one. Out of all of the ones that I've been tracking, I've become extremely interested in this again after a period of about 7 to 8 months. And this one, I've actually built up a large position in the last 3 weeks or so. So, as a disclosure before we start, this is now one of my top holdings at cost. And I have skin in the game in this. And hopefully, at the end of this presentation, you'll share my excitement and see why it's one of my top holdings. Okay. So, those who've never heard of this company before, it's sort of like a black box. It's not very easy to understand. And on my side, I've spent nearly 2 years now trying to understand, make sense of this. And all of the stuff that I'm sharing today has been born out of lots of scuttlebutt interactions with management and all of the work that I've done in the last 2 years. So the summary of this opportunity, the elevator pitch, is that PDS is a global scale platform filling a 150,000 crore sized hole in the industry. There are not a lot of companies that can do what they do, and fewer that can do this well and successfully scale. The second is that there are a lot of companies that claim to have a unique business model, right? PDS is one that I'm sure at the end of this talk, you'll agree that there's no listed business like it, especially with their strategy of hiring and retaining employees. That's going to be the central theme. And that same theme will be what drives their growth, what gives them a moat, and more. And it's built out of exceptional management. The third is that this is a company that's not new. It was established in the 90s, and across 3 cycles now, it's demonstrated market share gains. Anytime something bad happens to the industry, they triple their profits. Okay. And the last headline that I'm going to leave you with is that currently in the UK, despite high inflation, they've managed to make 40% ROCEs during headwinds. And it's available today at an FY27 PE of about 4. Okay, so I want you to remember these and ask me if I haven't convinced you on any of these points. Okay, so much like Shotadol presented, the value chain is in textiles. And in particular, they're very selective about which aspect of their value chain they focus on. So what they do is they deal with the back end for a lot of clothes that go into your stores from step 1, where they plan, what's being put out in the stores, to the designing of each piece of clothing. Sourcing takes care of what material composition you're making your clothes out of, where you're going to get it from, what lead time this takes, purchasing all of this, manufacturing, doing the quality assurance, which is not a simple step at all. And crucially, what they leave out is the dirty side of this business. They're not interested in logistics. They don't own trucks or ships or anything like that, nor do they own any assets like retailing. So no brick and mortar stores. They've very clearly said that's not a part of the value chain they focus on. I'm going to tell you about all of this in a lot more detail, but this is the backdrop around which this company is positioned. So when I say that they have a unique business model, the thing that should get you to set up and pay attention to them is their model of how they bring on employees and how they scale as a business. So their strategy to begin with is that they go to see, like, across the industry that they're at, they identify industry veterans who are at C-suite positions. Okay, and these are people who have very successfully scaled businesses on their own, managed large teams, introduced a product for the company that they've worked for, and done something of scale, okay, and of importance. And what they go to them and they do is they offer them profit sharing equity, and they say, we'll match your salary. And the idea is that they go to them and say, do whatever you're doing, do whatever you've done successfully, but be your own boss and do it within our platform as your own entrepreneur. Okay, so they onboard entrepreneurs. And they're very, very selective about what they want from these people. They need to satisfy one of three different things. The people they bring on must have expertise in a geography that PDS's network currently doesn't service. The second is a product line that they don't currently have ownership of. Or the third is a particularly important client that they don't currently have access to. If you are someone who's worked in any of these three lines that you can bring to the table, they will try to headhunt you. Then what do is they provide these people a network, meaning if you need suppliers, they have that. If you need people to help you with manufacturing, they give it to you. If you need financing to do what you do best, they have you, and as well as all the legal issues associated with customs, moving cross-border, and none of these are trivial at all. Okay, and the point is that because they match profit sharing, they match the salary given to these entrepreneurs, the attrition rate here is extremely low. For example, some of the entrepreneurs that they've onboarded have been with the firm now for over 20 years. Okay, so I want to give you some case studies of what these people that they bring on look like. Okay, this guy is someone that they brought on a couple of months ago. And if you look at his accomplishments, he was someone who was responsible for this brand called Matalan. It's a retailer of clothes. And this guy successfully opened 50 stores in 13 different countries for Matalan. Okay, so vast experience in scaling businesses across new countries. And he was responsible for bringing celebrity fashion collections. So the Kardashians and Robbie Williams way back in 2012 to 2014. PDS approached them and acquired this guy, effectively making him an entrepreneur. And the idea is he can do what he's done in the past now, but with PDS's clients and PDS's network. Okay, so they formed a new subsidiary effectively with this guy at the helm, and they usually share equity, something like 75-25. Okay, first case study. The second is this guy here, whose name is Eric Liddell. And here the idea is this Li & Fung that you'll see is the company that sort of made this fashion outsourcing thing possible. And this was a company set up in the 1980s. And what they did was they took large orders from Western brands and they distributed those large orders for clothing amongst many different partner factories back home in China. So across, I think, a 30-year legacy, this Li & Fung managed to build a 150,000 crore business and ultimately went bust. Okay, so they went bust and were acquired for a really cheap price a couple of years ago. And this is a very, very famous company that if you read about, there have been books, case studies, everything under the sun written about these guys. So this one that they've poached was their executive vice president for a long period of time. And if you look at his experience, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. This guy grew a private label portfolio from 200 million to 600 million. And this guy they've onboarded. So you'll see here that it's a subsidiary formed under PDS with this guy at the helm. And he's the one spearheading their expansion in the United States. Okay. Last case study, I'm going to start with a story because this is a particularly interesting one. This is another subsidiary of PDS called Simple Approach, established in 2004. So 19 years with them. And it's a very special story because this was the first entrepreneurs that the management of PDS brought on. So the story here is the guy behind PDS, the jockey, his name is Palak Seth. And he did his studies abroad and didn't want to go back home to India. He wanted to do something abroad in this fashion sourcing industry. So he went to Hong Kong. And he at the time really looked up to Li & Fung. They were everywhere. They were the biggest players in this industry at the time, but he couldn't acquire businesses like them. And he soon realized that his ability to scale was limited by the number of hours he has in a week to go and meet clients and talk to them. So this guy came up with this model of trying to offer people equity and bring them on board in this way and then leverage this network, right? He came up with this in his 20s. And at the time, he spoke to someone who was an industry veteran twice his age. Okay, and at the age of, in his mid-20s, he was able to convince this guy called Sunny Malhotra to leave his cushy job, and join him in this fledgling venture, which was PDS at the time. So remarkable skill to showcase his vision and convince someone else to join him. And this guy has stayed with PDS for 20 years now. Okay, and the idea here is what I've highlighted from this interview is that Simple Approach has managed to retain 99% of their people. And this is true when you look at their page that no one leaves. Okay, and on my side, I've done scuttlebutt in talking to some of these entrepreneurs, and they've given me stories of how PDS genuinely gives them autonomy over what they do. And one case study for this is during COVID, they were able to source masks where they knew that there was a supply shortage of these masks, and they were able to, on their own, without talking to anyone or getting clearances from anyone, know that there were partners in China who could supply this, knew that there was a large deal in the making, and they were able to do this seamlessly without any red tape. So it effectively tries to champion this idea that you can bring on these people who know what they're doing and not cripple them with bureaucracy. And the second beautiful aspect of this business is that Palak talks about how it's very difficult to find all of these people that I've highlighted before present in one company. They would kill each other with politics, he says. But here, in a way where you form a subsidiary with them and there's profit sharing, you're allowed to have all of these people in the same company and not have them step on each other's toes. I can give you more details about this as we go on. So if you see their business verticals, right, you'll notice that they currently have these different brands that make up their top 10. And all of these effectively are some subsidiary that leads as CEO for each one that you see, right? So if you look at Spring, this is a Turkey-focused arm that does manufacturing. So if there's any retailer in the UK that says we want to manufacture clothes in Turkey, they don't have assets on the ground in Turkey. They have a team that just knows and has been there for 20 years and can effectively and seamlessly give this to them. So these are the top 10 verticals. It's not meant for you to look at in any other way, just to understand that, yeah, there are many different subsidiaries that contribute to this network. Note, however, that what's really nice about this company here is that because they're hiring, talent that are industry veterans in a particular area, they're geography agnostic. They're not limited to India, for example, in where they scale. And for them, entering a new geography is also particularly easy because they look for someone who's worked there for 25 years, has the right relations, and they'll bring them. And this is particularly important because otherwise it's difficult for you to go to Turkey, set up an office there, spend some time, like a lot of traditional companies do. So this is why it's special. And what do they do when they bring on these entrepreneurs? There are very specific targets that you agree to a 3-year business plan. In the first 12 months, the idea is to set up, your IT infrastructure, link you to the suppliers, all of that. And the idea is you should start reporting revenues within the first 12 months. And at the end of 3 years, be completely independent and operate at full scale. Okay, so this is generally the idea of these subsidiaries that they incorporate. And here's the way they've scaled over 20 years. From one subsidiary that I showed you earlier, they now are a network of over 100 entrepreneurs that are involved with PDS as of FY23. Okay, now that I've told you the business model and structure, what do these people all do at the same time? So there are 4 key verticals within PDS. Okay, the first is something called design-led sourcing. This today is about 90% of their top line. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It's basically what they do here is that they sit down with their retailing customers. So in the UK, this would be Primark, Asda, George, right? People like this. And before winter season, they would talk to them about an idea for these retailers on what do you want to have in your stores. Have you thought about within your knitwear, what kind of designs? And then from that, say we'll do the design for you, we'll source things, we'll manufacture through various partners, and we'll deliver you the finished goods. So every season they will sit down with their clients and basically take them through the value chain that I've shown you before. So this is effectively what design-led sourcing is. Okay. The second arm is manufacturing, and this is the only bit of hard assets they actually have on the ground. And this is more of a regulatory need after a couple of bad incidents that happened in the industry in the 2010. Around that time, there were pretty bad fires and building collapses that happened in Bangladesh. And after that, the retailers refused to work with purely sourcing companies and want them to have skin in the game. So for this, they decided that they're going to set up manufacturing in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. They chose this very specifically because Bangladesh has tariff-free trade to the UK and EU. And this effectively for them is a regulatory need. It's not something that they're going to sink a lot of capital into, but they wanted to make sure they do it right. So they made sure that the factories that they've built have good working conditions for their workers. They recycle water. They have a renewable plant and so on to make sure that, for their clients, they are sustainable and compliant. The third and the fourth vertical are going to be the primary focus of my presentation today, because the two at the bottom effectively offer a 500 crore PAT opportunity incrementally going forward. These are the new age offerings and are the ones that you should be paying attention to, because these are significant. These are new offerings that PDS has effectively come up with and created in the last couple of years. Okay, so let me talk to you a bit about that. Brand management, okay, is you would have all heard of Ted Baker as a brand. It's a really, really famous clothing company, 4,000 crores in revenue, global brand. Okay. Ted Baker, which was established around 30 years ago, went through financial struggles post-COVID. And they tried to rejig their management team and it didn't really work. So they were acquired by this entity called Authentic Brands Group, ABG. Okay, ABG acquired Ted Baker. ABG is a very large $20 billion group, which has more than, I think, 50 brands under their wing. Like they own Arrow, Aeropostale, Van Huysen, and so on and so forth. There's a huge list of brands that they own. Ted Baker is now one more feather in their cap. Authentic Brands Group has a very nice business model, which is that once they acquire a brand, okay, there are three components to a clothing line like Ted Baker. Someone who owns the intellectual property, right, for Ted Baker. Then there's the dirty work of design and brand, the manufacturing of all your clothing, right? And finally, when you have your finished clothing, there's someone who needs to retail them in physical stores or in online e-commerce stores. So what ABG decided was, we'll keep the IP. We're going to outsource the design and brand management to one company and the retailing to a completely different company. So for PDS, this is an extremely important win because they have won the rights to do the design and brand management. So from going from just sourcing clothing and things, they are now, they have a lot more autonomy over what makes up Ted Baker. This is a big responsibility given to PDS, that they have a lot more autonomy over what designs go into the brand, what effectively is being put out on the shelves, what material composition. And if you get this wrong, you could lose and damage the brand, the image of it. Right? So it's a very large responsibility that's been given to them. And equally, this is a very large opportunity for PDS. So this design and brand management is a 250 to around 300 crores of EBITDA that they can generate out of this as they go forward. And the reason that I say that in our fourth point that this has long-term levers is because actually this is not their first deal win with Authentic Brands Group. It's their second. So PDS has managed to win wallet share with this company. This is a recurring theme. You're going to hear about this again and again. And last year, they formed a deal with ABG to do licensing for Forever 21. Okay, that's another clothing brand. And they've scaled that deal win to now doing brand management. So this is something that can open doors for PDS, A, with other companies, and B, if this is successful, of course, it adds a lot to the bottom line going forward. But as I said, ABG is a $20 billion group. If they're good at this, they will be able to replicate this at scale with other brands that ABG currently owns. Okay, so this is the first new age vertical that they've brought on that is worth paying attention to. The second is something called sourcing as a service. Okay, and you'll remember that when I spoke about design-led sourcing, these are just keywords and jargon. You can come up with whatever you like for yourselves to remember. But what they do here in sourcing as a service is instead of sitting seasonally with their clients every 6 months and come up with a design and do the sourcing and give it to them, here it's even more lucrative for PDS. Effectively, what they do is for Asda here, every bit of clothing that George, which is a unit of Asda, every bit of clothing that this retailer moves right to the UK out of Bangladesh, PDS will open offices for George on the ground, and every bit of merchandise that Asda owns will flow through that office, which PDS will oversee. So it's really like a consulting business, which for these retailers is very attractive because their cost of complexity comes down. You're giving outsourcing a particularly difficult operation, being on top of customs, making sure nothing is rejected at the ports. You're on top of compliance. You're on top of quality assurance. You're on top of audits. This is something I've spent a lot of time to try and verify through Scuttlebutt. And for these retailers, it's quite costly to set up an auditor at each factory that you partner with. So this is something that if you give it to a team that knows what it's doing, it can save you a lot of money. So sourcing as a service is a new offering where they've expanded on their value chain and offered retailers the idea that they will effectively do consultancy for them. Okay, this for PDS in turn is an infinite ROCE vertical because they don't have to incrementally deploy any new capital, right? It exists on already the entrepreneurs that they have on board, the offices, the partner factories that they're already auditing in the first place. So from a hat, they've pulled out something that to them, they said, has picked up like fire on the ground and could be extremely, extremely lucrative in the long term. Currently, the deal wins that they've won can generate 200 crores of PAT annually. Okay, so this is why these two verticals that I've told you about, brand management and sourcing as a service, are what you should be paying attention to for this company. And remember the motive I told you about that we're going to keep going over with wallet share wins. Asda, that they do sourcing as a service for, is not a new client. Actually, it's a client they've worked with now for 23 years. Poetic Gem is an entrepreneur that was onboarded in, I think, the 90s or early 2000s with PDS. And this is a 23-year-old relationship that has resulted in, this sourcing as a service thing. Now, I also want to take a moment to point out an extremely underappreciated moat that this business has with entrepreneurs. And you're going to see it now in the next slide. So this sourcing as a service that they do with George Asda, okay, this person is the commercial director for PDS for this particular deal. Look at their experience before they joined PDS. They've worked with Asda for 22 years. And after working at Asda as the head of global sourcing, they're now just working with the same client. They're working effectively for Asda, but under PDS's wing here. Now, if you were a competitor for PDS, how do you displace 24 years of experience, personal experience, with a very specific company? This is everything that encapsulates PDS's business model. You bring on people like this, you're impossible to displace. It's very easy for you to scale your wallet share with a client because you've brought someone on who knows everything about your client in the first place. So this is something that I would urge you all to take a moment to appreciate because this is something you don't see often in other businesses. Okay, so these are the two verticals, the brand management, sourcing as a service, which can incrementally add 500 crores or more of EBITDA going forward. So what are the near-term triggers that make this interesting and what are the longer-term triggers? So right now, the idea is that all of these deal wins that you saw, brand management with Ted Baker, right, and sourcing as a service with Asda, they came during a period of industry headwinds here in the UK. Okay, there's been high inflation. The retailers have been hurt over the last year. PDS has just gobbled up market share. They've won two huge deals during this period of industry turmoil. This is not the first time. If you listen to Palak's interviews, he says that after the 2008 crisis, PDS tripled their profits. And again, in I think 2012 or 13, they were able to win significant market share after that period of upheaval. So this is a company that's demonstrated this now over 15 years across cycles that you can really win deals from clients and scale them successfully. So the second near-term trigger in the UK and EU is that the EU is trying to crack down on fast fashion. So they've noticed that a lot of clothing has been worn only for around 5 or 6 times before they're thrown away. So they're looking at trying to make sure that A, you use more sustainable materials, and two, that you recycle clothing better. Okay, and PDS actually is a thought leader in this. And if you look at the value chain that they're a part of, they have a few entrepreneurs that work on this recovery side of the value chain. Okay, so PDS is, if you listen to Palak speak, a lot of it has been on championing sustainability. So any move like this effectively puts pressure on companies to spend more time on their supply chain, which is really, really good for PDS. This is currently in the parliament in the European Union, and they're expecting regulations that will be rolled out over the next 5 years or so. Okay, so this is a near-term opportunity in the UK and EU. This is important because around 85% of PDS's revenue comes from UK and EU. The longer-term growth triggers for PDS actually comes from the US. Why? Because the size of the clients in the US are around 10 to 20 times that of the UK. So today, PDS works with all of the large retailers in the UK, for example, Primark, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, John Lewis, everyone that you can name, they work with them. PDS also works with Walmart in the US. And they said that one of Walmart's, if you make it as a preferred supplier for Walmart as one of their sourcing partners, Walmart alone can generate 20 billion, I think 3 billion, 20,000 crores, I think he said, of revenue for one of its sourcing partners. So it's a large opportunity that you can generate. So they're trying to scale this, and this will be the largest quantum of leap that can come in PDS's business journey. So currently, they're thinking about how to get this right, and this management is extremely conscious about not burning money. So they're taking their time here because they've told me that this is a very cutthroat market. So they have 4 prongs of attack with being successful at this. The first is to take this brand management that they've won with Authentic Brands Group to more brands in the US. If they can demonstrate success here, there are lots of clients that are interested in something like this. The second is that they're looking to explore manufacturing and sourcing closer to the US. This is something like I was telling you about with nearshoring. Nothing is known as of yet. These are just strategies that are being thought of. The third is to scale existing clients they have deals with the USA. So Walmart, for example, PDS is now in their 3rd year of business with Walmart. They've done this with 2 different subsidiaries. The first is with something called Upcycle Labs, and the second is with, I think, Far East. These are 2 different subsidiaries that have relationships with Walmart, and they're trying to work with them. PDS also works with Kohl's, which is another retailer. They also work with Ralph Lauren. And the idea is that, with time, they should be able to scale this because they've done this with every other client that they've won. So there's no single prong of attack here, but they're looking for different avenues to do this. The fourth thing, of course, is to onboard entrepreneurs who are in the US. The problem with this is that they're significantly more expensive than those in the UK and EU. So it requires thought and care because you're offering them equity. So you want to bring them on at the right time and be careful. And PDS doesn't want to raise debt at all. So for that reason, they're monitoring this. They're being careful with how they do this, and they don't want to burn cash. But this is their not immediate. You won't see the triggers play out immediately, but much like you saw large deal wins in the UK, this would be what one can hope for in the next 5 to 10 years. This is a really, really long runway for this company. Last thing I want to discuss with you is the industry structure, okay, which is that I told you earlier, this Li and Fung has left a large vacuum in this industry that a lot of people have tried to fill. Currently, what's happened is that for a lot of their clients, whether it's Primark, Sainsbury's, and so on and so forth, the largest competition actually comes from the in-house sourcing teams. So outsourcing hasn't really happened. They claim that this is the biggest competition is the in-house sourcing teams, that they're able to sit down and showcase that they can do this better. Okay, this is something I've spent 2 years on now, but there's been no report, no data point that actually shows how much of this industry has been outsourced and how much has been done in-house. I've been searching for a concrete number. PDS themselves don't know, but from their scuttlebutt, they say that almost everything is done in-house. Okay, so that's something that I've not yet been able to find an answer for. The third thing is to ask what other companies that exist that do this sourcing side of the supply chain. And there are three that are important. Two are based in the UK EU, which are William E. Connor and New Times Group. To me, there are two interesting points of view on this. The first is I couldn't find a single new deal win for either of these two in the last 5 years. So they haven't really taken up headlines in any way. The second is when I asked management about these two companies, their take on them is that they don't have the same entrepreneurship structure that PDS has. They're more a hierarchical organization. So the edge that PDS has over them is that they've got people with 20 years of work experience with their clients. And that's something these people can never get. So that's their answer. The O5 group is a group in the US, which is sort of doing sourcing, but they are basically at the port. Okay, so they're not a completely integrated player, but it's an example of people in the US that they're trying to target. So this is sort of the industry structure, and it's favorable to me because I don't see any direct competition within this nuance of the business model that PDS has brought on. Okay, so at the final step on where I am with the business and what I need to understand better, my targets at the moment are to speak to PDS's clients. I've spoken to PDS enough. I need to speak to Asda, Primark, all of them, the heads of their sourcing, to understand how they see PDS and where they fit it as a cog in their machinery. The second is I'm trying to work on speaking to the heads of this sourcing as a service, as well as the Ted Baker design group. If I can speak to them, then I'll understand in far more detail the day-to-day of both of these verticals. The third is to speak to these two competitors that I've told you, but basically this is my order of priority. So the last thing I'll leave you with is PDS is interesting also to me because Harvard wrote a case study on the business about this unique entrepreneurial structure that they've got. And that's a really interesting read, not as a confirmation of investment thesis, but it's a very different take to the analyst style reports that you'll read on any company. It's a lot like one of Sanjay Bakshi's blogs. So I'm happy to link that to anyone who's interested in the business because he talks about how it was not easy to bring on these entrepreneurs in the beginning. They often stepped on each other's toes, poached clients from each other. It was difficult to integrate them and get them to agree on a platform structure. So that took 10 years of working, trial and error before they've got where they are today, where things work. And you'll see this also reflected on Screener that before like 2018, they didn't have this structure set up in a way that made sense and was viable. So their ROCs, despite making 60% today in the sourcing vertical, their ROCs were never better than 5% or so until 2018. From 2018, which is a very, very big turning point in the company, they've gone to become a company that's a negative cash, working cycle company. They're net cash today. And actually the sourcing business, as you see, is a 60% ROC company. So that's sort of why I left this headline right at the start, that they currently have some cash on their balance sheet that they will be deploying into an office. X of the cash, they're around 40% ROC. So this is where we stand. This is what's available today. I think this is a business that has a really clear moat, a very unique business model, clear levers to scale, and has demonstrated competence across different market cycles. And for this reason, I've made it one of my top holdings right now. No one is excited about this business because they see 100 different subsidiaries and scream red flag. And it's also very difficult, I think, for anyone to understand this business. In the first year, I didn't even pick up that there were entrepreneurs as a part of this. So it took a long time to unpack the levers behind this. So now I'll be happy to take questions and discuss.
Hey, I had a question on this Ted Baker Group deal, right? So usually, like the brand management is part of IP, right? That's unique. Isn't that, that's like a separate set of skills, right? Or different set of skills, right? And isn't that what's kept in-house generally and the rest out?
Yeah. I think you should think of it as a spectrum where a lot of these companies that do the design work, there's a degree of autonomy that they get over the design. And usually it's in the hands of the clients to say, this is what we're strict on. Here, ABG's model has been to sort of outsource the brand management entirely as well. To them, the IP is just the Ted Baker. And they've done this successfully before. Like I think they mentioned Reebok was another company that they have done this model successfully with in the past, and now have done this with Ted Baker.
Can I go ahead? Okay. Oh, nice presentation. So, okay, on overall globally, like, so do I value the company as a holding company, or do I value a company as a platform company? Like if I value as a holding company, because that's how you do for many, which holds many subsidiaries, you kind of value them as a holding company. Then you would at least provide a 30 to 60% of discount to that. That's how it trades in the market. So how do you see this?
Yeah, I don't think you can think of this as a traditional holding company because several points. One, these subsidiaries are all in the same business. So they're not in different areas of business. It's just a structure that allows for profit sharing, which allows each of them to have their interests aligned. Okay, that's explained in the case study that I'll send to you. The second is that because they own about 75% of equity, within each subsidiary, it doesn't really make sense as a holding company, but it's just the sum of the parts. You can't value each one independently because each of them is an entrepreneur that brings together something that adds to this network. So it's difficult to think about it as a holding company. Also, you'd go mad trying to do a sum of the parts for 108 different subsidiaries.
Okay, so I leave it at that. So going granularly, so the whole investment thesis pitches on mainly like on kind of personal retainment, like because for each one you really have, for example, take a brand management, you have one key person who kind of holds all the expertise, who will do everything. So how do they retain? Because people do job hopping for money, fame, promotion. For example, in my case, I settle for less salary for freedom. So what is that it holds them to the company?
Yeah. So first on data is that they've managed to retain these people from the 90s. So if you see some of their oldest verticals, I think more than 10 or 15 of them have been established before 2010. And the levers of keeping them is threefold. The first is that, remember, they match the salary that these people get for work that they do for other companies. The key point here is autonomy, that they have the ability to not have to deal with bureaucracy and red tape, but effectively, scale and do whatever they have done before for themselves. The third is that given that PDS often gives them equity at the same time, it means that on top of your salary with equity, you make far, far more than you would have without the company. So when I've spoken to some of these entrepreneurs, and that has been my learning from this.
I mean, isn't that what other companies also do?
Not to the same degree.
Okay.
Not anywhere close.
Okay, I stop. Maybe I come back later.
Hey, question. So the equity is in that subsidiary, not in the parent company, or both?
Yeah, that's so two things. The first is maybe that's another way of saying the same thing to Rajan, that here it's not an ESOP directly, but the subsidiary that they form with the entrepreneur, PDS owns 75%. The entrepreneur owns 25%. So on top of their salary, they make 25% of the profits that they do. Some of them have told me examples of how they've genuinely made personal fortunes with some deals that they were able to do with this profit sharing that PDS has allowed. And on top of that, there's a framework where I think the top 10 employees also get an ESOP in addition. So it's like a 2-tier framework.
So what you're saying is the entrepreneurs who, sorry, I think I interrupted someone. Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So the entrepreneurs who are partnering with PDS, what they gain from the deal, I mean, they in their existing business, they were an employee of some company or they had an independent business, right? So in the case they had an independent business, what they gain from this partnership is the scale of the PDS network.
Exactly. Scale, autonomy to not have to deal with red tape. That's something that I've heard many, many times now that is important enough to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And then the new capabilities that you mentioned, right, which is brand management and sourcing,
Yeah.
that they're trying to explore right now. So my thinking is, right, this would be a new capability. And what this means is they would try to onboard people with these capabilities into their ecosystem.
Almost not quite, because they've actually been doing everything that encompasses the value chain of brand management. They offer design. They, I think, have maybe 400 or more designers spread across these different subsidiaries. Poetic Gem is a good example. Simple Approach is another one. So they already cater to design. They already cater to sourcing. They already cater to renewable, recyclable materials. They do manufacturing on their own with partner factories in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Turkey, for example. So it's not any new capability, anything new that they've not had 20 years of experience doing. It's that they've brought on a new product that wasn't there in the past. So they've effectively created more of the value chain that they can take on for themselves.
So what you're saying is they have done an internal reorganization to present a new capability to the client, which was already existing, but probably not coming out as clearly.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Okay. Is there any timeline when we see these two? So these two are the strongest, like short-term levers, right? Is there any timeline around which we expect them to kick in terms of impact on revenues? I'm thinking bottom line impact would be trailing a bit, right?
Yeah. So they've said that they'll ramp up annually with time. And here, Ted Baker, I think they mentioned in the last call that it was active for, I think, 15 days in the last quarter and was already profitable. They've given a guidance of around 1,000 crores of PAT in the next 3-4 years or so, which is where I've come to my figure. You can, yeah.
Okay.
So that's where I got to FY27 PE of 4.
Well,
so currently,
if you're saying 1,000 crores of PAT, like is that going to be a higher margin business compared to the business that they have currently, which is, I think, a 4% margin business, right?
Yeah. So if you look at the margin, it looks like it's a 4% margin business. That's because the top line isn't really their top line. The top line is something called the gross merchandise value. Okay. So for PDS, the actual take home is literally the gross margin that they make, because that's mainly what it is. The manufacturing arm is only about 5% of the top line. It'll never be more than 5% of the top line. So the EBITDA margin the management thinks of is actually the margins they make on the gross margin. Okay, but the newer ones are far higher. Sourcing as a service could be 20% PBT. Brand management could be 35% EBITDA margin. So far, far higher value than the legacy sourcing business.
Yeah, and I mean, just a bit deviating off topic, I have worked on a couple of sourcing projects with certain UK companies, not retailers per se, but the in-house sourcing capabilities that many of the big conglomerates or big brands that in the UK have, you would certainly be able to spot inefficiencies there. And then, like, even as consultants, when we go in, we're able to deliver like 10% or 8% savings on their existing sourcing. So I think the problem that they're solving for, it's very much real. It's existing in the wider context. But I can check and provide you like an unofficial number on what the industry numbers could look like if you have done a project with an Apple company. I'll check that and let you know.
Yeah, thank you. I'd appreciate that. I think Dinar was saying something.
So I guess on the Ted Baker deal, right? So I think it would be slightly different because they're acquiring the current in-house brand team, right?
No. So they've set up a new subsidiary, so that's what they call acquiring. Yeah. So they've brought on, again, an entrepreneur who does this. The person they've brought on to manage Ted Baker Design Group is someone who oversaw the retail operations for Liverpool and Arsenal, the football clubs, and their merchandising. So it's someone who's had, again, 20 years of experience in this thing. And that's the person they brought on to head this design group. I told you, I'm trying to speak to this particular guy to understand more. But this deal just went through maybe 3 or 4 months ago. Yeah. So they've got clear mandates that Ted Baker was known for.
But I kind of saw somewhere that they're saying, oh, some people have been transferred from Ted Baker. They inherited.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think it's, authentic. I think it's something that happens when you acquire a business, that you will retain some portion of old employees. You can't guarantee who. Some may have key relationships that you want to keep on board. So it's some internal discussion that only they would be on top of. Yeah.
So I don't get this. So what does exactly ABG do then, right? Other than, because, if you have like a brand like Ted Baker, then the brand management is, the media, like who's your ambassadors, what's your image? Yeah. So even that's outsourced. Is it? Wouldn't that be very specific to each brand?
No,
And
because
then the rest is
it's true. It's true. So it requires a large deal of trust. I'm not denying that at all. But often these companies may not just be interested in this. So I'll give you another example of this. I think Arvind Fashions in India does precisely this, that they own the licensing deals of some global brands. They manufacture, they also do the dirty work of retailing. And ultimately, what does the person who owns the IP get? They get a royalty fee from the retailer, for example. And in Arvind Fashion's case, it's often 15%, 12%. It varies on the brand. Some of them also have profit sharing. So that's the bit that they get. They've effectively outsourced all the dirty work, and it's effectively equity almost that you own, you get royalty payments for, and you've outsourced the rest of this to other people.
so would would PDS have a bit more risk in the brand management, because then I guess they're defining what each season's collection should be, and then
Exactly. Yeah, it's a huge responsibility. But again, they've brought on people who've done this for a long time.
But this is a new addition to new extension to the existing.
Sort of. Remember, they've already done this before, but not to this degree of autonomy. So the autonomy is new, but the capabilities have been there for a large period of time. So
I kind of see everything beyond that. Say if you say George, right? So I guess usually in-house they would decide, like what my target audience would be, and what ranges to keep, and what the price points would be, and then they would outsource everything else, right?
Yeah, so I can tell you, let me give you 3-4 different pointers on this. The first is I will link you to 2 con calls in particular, 2 very special ones where they've sat down and they've explained this in detail. I think the first one was in November 2022 or 2021. That one is, I think, Q3 FY22. I'll link you to that call. He's explained every bit from the start to finish what this design looks like. Okay, so that's one worth reading because you'll get it straight from them in a lot of detail. The second thing is there are a lot of all of their existing deals. There's a spectrum to the autonomy that this goes to. So, for example, with Sainsbury's in the UK, they also have a clothing brand called Tube. Okay, PDS under, I think, Simple Approach has a deal with Tube where they work on something called a private label. So it's not just design that they do for Sainsbury's, for each season, but they say, okay, there's a particular brand where we do a little more than this design-led sourcing. That private label brand, PDS will do everything for. And for Sainsbury's, this is a good guinea pig to see if, their outsourcing work leads to something better. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of these things that they do.
Eventually, Sainsbury's would just completely outsource TU and then earn margins on the retailing part or something.
Exactly. For this one private label within TU, and this is something that they're trying to.
So currently, you're saying as a guinea pig, they've given this small thing on this new model, but they might just then get rid of all the TU brand management in house.
Exactly, and eventually win market share. So the brand management is new. That's why this Ted Baker thing is really worth watching, because if this is a success, doors will open. They said something similar for onboarding this guy called Damien, that after getting him on board, a lot of people have, he's known completely across the industry. In the UK, he won I think the equivalent of the Bharat Ratna. He was awarded a title from the British Royals. So he's extremely well known in the industry, and people will talk to them about things. So it's a lot of different, ways of scaling. Harsh, you've been silent. That's scary.
The US trigger, like the US expansion hasn't gone since last year. They haven't really made any inroads in the US. So
they said in their history they tried to in the past and burnt their hands. So they'd done it a little too quickly in the past, and their words are that in the US, the market is just a lot more cutthroat, and the way that business is done is far different from the UK and EU. So from this learning, they realized that they need more feet on the ground, things like that. So actually, if you see, they were very specific at who they've brought on board. So this Eric Liddell that I told you about from Li & Fung, he's one that's currently spearheading that growth. So it's new. Yeah. So if you say UK, they're about 20 years down in their client relationships. In the US, it's more like 3 to 4 years.
Okay, but since this guy Eric's joined, have they got any traction in the US? So
yeah, so I think in FY22 or 23, I forget which year, I think US went from 8% of the top line to around 16%. You can see that in the thing. I think I asked a question also on the con call, and Palak explained this. I'll link you again to the
I'll
the
start
particular call.
and
I'll link everyone to the case study. I have it with me, so I'll share it with everyone so that it's easy. I think someone asked in the chat, and that's the case study.
And what's the reason for your, the timing? Like, why now? I know you've been following it for a year, right?
2 years, yeah. Why now? Actually, I owned the business from 2021 till about Jan in 2023. Then I sold because of the headwinds that all of us saw. So I thought the numbers would be far worse than what they've come out with, but they've managed to win 2 deals that have already started. So my feeling is for 3 reasons that I think the business bottom has probably already been made. Okay, the first is these large deal wins that have been won now gives them additional visibility that they just didn't have 1 year ago. This is 500 crores of EBITDA out of thin air, right? The second is if you look at a lot of these businesses are listed. So I believe Primark is listed, Asda, and other large retailers, H&M and Zara. Okay, and I'm reading their commentary, and they've actually managed to grow 6% year on year despite this high inflation. It's been puzzling. I think one of them actually upped their guidance for the end of the year. So despite this, it's baffling to me. I don't see why people are still spending. But the retailers have actually held up strong. So my feeling is, as we had a really mild summer, if the energy costs also in the winter stay, fairly benign now this year after last year's natural gas thing, perhaps, the bottom for the industry has already been made. So that's something I'm watching closely. So for that reason, I thought, given all of this visibility, I'd rather not play dice here. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been this confident. Now, I think enough has happened for me to say there's a fairly long runway of growth that one can understand. I also didn't understand sourcing as a service and design-led sourcing until fairly recently. Actually, if you see for the last year, every con call they're asked without failure, what's the difference between these two? What does it mean? And no one really understood until Q4. Q4's con call is really special because a tip I can give you guys is anytime Palak is on the call, it's a good call. So he gave a very, very thorough answer to one of the members on VP. He asked him to explain everything. And that Q4 call is a joy to read. Okay, Q4 FY23.
Yeah, so, and this Ted Baker thing that I was going through it, but it's still not entirely clear. They have some UK and European distribution part as well, right?
Yeah, they've won
the
rights
risk reward
for
is not entirely clear how much inventory they would. I guess some risk comes associated with that, right? Yeah, if they forecast things incorrectly.
Yeah, that's true. I think they have to pay a minimum guarantee for this wholesale business. But when I asked them, they said the wholesale business is not new. They've done work like this before with Poetic Gem. So I shared the same concerns in the beginning, and then I'm fairly happy with.
Okay.
With their
Poetic Gem is the George thing.
Yeah, that's something they set up in 2000. George was their first client, and then they've scaled successfully.
And lastly, so why is this incorporated in India? Like Palak could do it anywhere, right? Or
they said that every investor has asked them exactly that question, that if they had listed in the States, for example, the valuation would be a different story. It would be better understood. It was listed in India because it was a part of the family business. Okay, so Palak's dad, he owned a textile business in India called Pearl Global. That's also listed. You'll find it there. Palak's brother, Pulak, or Pulkit, I forget his name, he runs Pearl Global, and Palak ran PDS. And this actually was born out of a demerger in 2012 or 2014. So from Pearl Global, it split and listed. Well, we can ask them to list abroad as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, yeah, just curious. Okay.
So for me, I didn't have this visibility. So I would not have pitched this with as much confidence maybe a year ago because there were so many questions to me. Now that I understand how sourcing as a service works and I've spoken to them in a lot more detail, I'm fairly confident that we have visibility for this 1,000 crores of PAT. It may not happen in FY27. The timeline of this may change, but I have more confidence that they'll achieve this going forward. So my hope is that the market can't ignore a 1,000 crore PAT business that makes 40% ROCs.
Yeah, and then this Lee, when this, what was the sourcing thing? Lee and
Lee and Fung.
Yeah. So when their market share sort of apparently reduced drastically, right, from whatever 90% it reduced, right? Where did it go? Like who took up the sourcing thing if there's no other companies?
Yeah, my feeling is that went in-house. I asked them before, they said mostly in-house because there aren't, I think, other companies that do this like PDS. The second answer is some manufacturing companies have become larger, so they're able to afford more auditors and be on top of this and interface with clients directly. The advantage to PDS is that if they are the ones sort of negotiating on the client's behalf, they have an edge that the manufacturers just can't get.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Chinmay. First of all, congrats for the great amount of enthusiasm that you bring to this idea. About 6 months back, you were depressed about this.
I was not depressed. I told you it's a good time to study because the industry was going through pain. It would be far more expensive today, I think, if we didn't have headwinds.
I have a couple of questions. So I have gone through some of their very older annual reports and presentations. Earlier, they used to give this split between retailers, sales to retailers versus brands. And in the recent presentations, I have not seen that. Do you know how that has evolved? Because my perception is that branded sales are a bit higher margin for them compared to retailer because branded customers might demand higher quality fabric or something.
So what they said, it's a good question. What they've told me is that there's a split in the value chain. So retailers are generally your Tesco, Asda, Lidl, those kind of people. The brands are people like Ted Baker. So their idea was that the volumes that the retailers bring is just far higher than the brands. And often with brands, there's a limit to how much they can scale unless there's a parent who owns that brand that also has more. So that's a good question. I haven't really tracked the difference between retail and brand right now, because to me, I think if you put 100% of your bandwidth into Ted Baker and Asda, that's more than enough to understand the incremental value in the business, but we can ask them. I think U2's con call Palak will be there. It'll be a good time to ask.
Another thing they used to really focus on is trying to diversify away from apparels and try to also go into other kinds of fabrics. So things which you use in homes and those things. And this used to be about 1 or 2%, and their focus was on this. But I was looking at the recent numbers; it's still 4% of the sales. Do you know, what happened to those plans? Because I would imagine supplying to a Walmart or these kinds of stores, home furnishing stores, should bring in more turnover from that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They haven't abandoned the plan at all. So Casa Collective that I told you in the US is precisely home essentials. They're trying to scale this. They're hoping that they can bring, this is another way that they can win wallet share with even UK, EU retailers, because they don't currently service them on homeware. So it's something that they need to demonstrate capability, win trust, start small scale with time.
So this is something which has not yet happened for them.
Yeah, it's another lever in time. There's enough. Their words to me was that in the last 25 years, they've not seen business momentum like they've seen in the last a year or so.
My next question is on the so if you look at the numbers, actually sourcing was always a very profitable business for them. It was never loss making. So the reasons why it didn't get reflected into consolidated profits was the manufacturing. I think they started in 2015 or 16 and they used to do 40-50 crores of EBITDA loss, which turned around recently, like in 2020-21, which has kind of shown the huge jump in profitability. Because turnover and those things were always there. It was just that one business segment was making losses. So my questions are twofold here. What brought about this change in profitability in the manufacturing operations, and are these sustainable?
Yeah, great questions. Actually, my initial investment thesis in PDS was that they had a loss-making subsidiary that had more losses in it than good. So when I first invested in 2021, I got lucky because that was precisely the year where this manufacturing went profitable, as you said. This was part of my initial investment thesis. You'll see long old posts on VP highlighting these losses. So the reason for this is that they never really stopped investing in lines in Bangladesh until after COVID. So from 2017, they bought out a huge piece of land. They built this factory. Then they kept adding lines, added capabilities, water recovery, solar panels. So the input cost into these factories hadn't really stopped for like 4 or 5 years. The second is they started getting a larger and larger order book post-COVID. So they said that's when sort of operating leverage started to kick in. They said on profitability, the manufacturing will never be more than 5-6% of the top line. It's more regulatory and a need than something they're going to sink capital into going forward. And they said they try for like 10% EBITDA margins, 35% gross margins is what they sort of said. They said that's typical for a manufacturing company from there, and that's about where they'll do. In the recent calls, they've also said that they changed management at this manufacturing facility a couple of years ago, which also led to this profitability. But I've not really spent more time on the manufacturing thing because they've sort of said, it's not as important for business momentum. But they said the other thing, that they were able to win some clients that were also interested in them because they had a manufacturing plant. So yeah, it's useful to keep around.
A follow-up to this is, I would imagine that in their sourcing business, they would not be holding inventory. So they would be doing order-based booking.
They carry no inventory at all outside of the very small wholesale business that they have.
And that's the reason probably why they have always created cash and they didn't have to rely on debt. And they never went bankrupt despite having very, very low margins and a very, very loss-making manufacturing business. And this, so with manufacturing scale-up, what kind of inventory requirements it brings up? Because that would be the only business segment which would require some inventory management.
Precisely. They said there's inventory just on the raw materials that are there, but as said, this will be not more than 5% of the top line. So the costs of this manufacturing arm going forward, it'll be independently run. Cash flows from there will go back into the manufacturing thing and it'll be self-sufficient from now on. Like they've stopped expanding. There's a really nice video on YouTube which highlights the journey of this particular plant, how many lines they added each year. So I don't see it's not going to be loss-making going forward. It should contribute to profits actually. So let's see.
I get your point. I think the last question which I also have, which is the only red flag I saw in this company, was they never pay taxes. Like their tax rate is abysmally low. It's about 7 to 12% for a very long period of time. And I feel one of the reasons for that is most of their subsidiaries are in Hong Kong. And the largest profitability that they make comes from Hong Kong. Do they have some kind of a tax shelter?
Yeah, I think they chose to incorporate these things in very specific areas. So you'll see in the Middle East, whatever operations they have are in these, special economic zones. The plants in Bangladesh are in a special economic zone. They incorporate in Hong Kong. And actually, on your point, this Ted Baker thing that they've incorporated in the UK. So you'll actually see a large jump in tax over the last 2 quarters, and it's annoying me quite a lot. But you'll see a significant jump in tax.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's actually a third thing about this in the call.
Yeah, they did. I should actually mention to all of you that there's a third vertical that they have, which is called the PDS Venture tech arm. Okay, and I think it's important to highlight not as a business vertical at all, but it's roughly something that they use as advertising. Like what they do is in the past they've spent a very small amount of money, I think some 150 crores or so, into state-of-the-art sustainability startups. And it's not meant for them to play private equity or do anything like that, but they use this to pitch to their clients to show that they have thought leadership in certain areas. So with Asda, for example, they've pitched in the past recovery of clothes that they've no longer used, old inventory. In the US with Walmart, they're doing something with this upcycle labs that they've invested in. So this is an example of what their arm is. It's mostly their compliance cost, you can think of.
The investments of 210 crores is mostly in compliance costs.
Well, I think part of that is in either land or something else, and a part of that is in this venture tech. It's given clearly in either the annual report or a presentation.
And just to follow up on this tax thing, will the tax rates remain? Will they remain at 8-10% level, or
I think whatever you saw in the last quarter, once Ted Baker scales, it might be a little more tax because that is extremely profitable, but they have to pay a large amount of tax. Whatever's in Hong Kong and these other economic zones, the tax regime is stable.
And I think in your talk you alluded to some tax breaks being taken away from supplies from Bangladesh. What was it? What were you?
Tariff. Just that they have free trade agreements with UK, EU. So it was a natural choice of them to explore manufacturing in Bangladesh. And that has to do with Bangladesh being a least developed country status. So they're saying the moment India gets, tax-free, duty-free, if that free trade agreement works, then they'll explore manufacturing in India as another option. But basically for UK retailers, Bangladesh is a preferred destination because of these treaties. The same reason applies to Turkey.
So, but
so
the
they had to put up
Bangladesh tax rebate is not going away from them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That was all of my questions.
I've spent 2 years on every red flag to try and understand that better, so please keep them coming.
I think most importantly, they are producing a lot of free cash flow and they are paying back dividends and they are not raising equity. So somewhere money is coming in the business. So I think that's the most important flag for me, like increasing dividends and not over leveraging your balance sheet and not diluting capital.
Precisely.
Can
we stop recording here?
Yeah, we will. But one last question. If you look at PDS, but if you look at the parent entity, they also reported similar change in their business trajectory, the number trajectory, and it's available at a significant discount to PDS even today, although its stock has been flying recently. Have you looked at Pearl Global Industries?
I haven't looked at them at all in any close detail.